For most of human history, becoming rich was almost impossible. You were born into a family, inherited its place in the world, worked the same land, used the same tools, and usually died with roughly the same level of wealth you began with. There were kings, priests, merchants, and conquerors who possessed far more than everyone else. But for ordinary people, wealth was not something you built. It was something you inherited, seized, protected, or lost. Then humans discovered something extraordinary. Wealth could grow. A field could produce more grain than one family could eat. A herd could multiply. A ship could return carrying goods worth many times its cost. Money could be lent and come back with interest. A workshop could keep earning even when its owner was asleep. And eventually, a person could own a small piece of a company operating on the other side of the world. That discovery changed civilization. It created merchants, landlords, bankers, industrialists, investors, millionaires, and billionaires. It built cities and empires. It also created inequality, exploitation, crashes, monopolies, and fortunes so large that a single person could influence entire nations. So how did humans learn to become rich? And why, after thousands of years of economic progress, do some people build wealth while others work their entire lives and never escape financial insecurity? The story begins before money. Early hunter-gatherers owned very little. People carried what they could use: tools, clothing, food, ornaments, and weapons. Survival depended on movement, cooperation, and sharing. A person could be respected, skilled, or influential, but accumulating enormous physical wealth was difficult when everything had to be carried from place to place. Then, agriculture changed the rules. When humans settled, planted crops, and raised animals, they could finally produce a surplus. For the first time, a family might harvest more grain than it needed for immediate survival. That extra grain could be stored, traded, lent, or used to support workers who were not farming. Surplus created possibility, but it also created control. Whoever controlled the grain store controlled something everyone needed. Whoever controlled the best land could demand a share of what others produced. Whoever owned large herds possessed animals that could reproduce and increase in number. This was one of the first great lessons of wealth. Owning a productive resource was different from simply owning an object. A necklace could be beautiful, but it did not create another necklace. A field could create a harvest every year. A herd could create more animals. A well could support an entire settlement. Land, livestock, and storage were not just possessions. They were assets. And assets could make their owners richer over time. As villages became cities, rulers and temples organized labor, taxation, and trade. They collected grain, metals, textiles, and animals. Wealth became measurable. It could be recorded on clay tablets, stored in warehouses, and transferred through promises. This was not yet modern capitalism. Most large fortunes were tied to political power, conquest, land, or religious authority. But the basic formula had appeared. Control something productive, claim part of what it produces, and use the surplus to acquire even more. Trade added another path. A farmer could become comfortable by producing surplus, but a merchant could become rich by moving goods between places where their value was different. Salt might be common in one region and precious in another. Spices could be purchased cheaply near their source and sold for extraordinary prices far away. Metals, cloth, wine, oil, timber, and grain all became opportunities. The merchant did not create the goods. He created access. He connected two markets and earned the difference. This was risky. Ships sank. Caravans were robbed. Wars closed trade routes. Rulers imposed taxes. But when a journey succeeded, the reward could be enormous. Trade revealed another rule of wealth. Value depends on location, timing, and information. The person who knew where something was cheap, where it was scarce, and how to move it safely possessed an advantage. Information itself became a form of capital. Ancient trading cities grew powerful because they sat between worlds. Merchants formed partnerships to spread risk. One person supplied money, another organized the journey, another provided ships or animals, and profits were divided when the goods arrived. This allowed wealth to grow beyond the limits of one person's labor. A worker could only work a certain number of hours, but a merchant could finance several journeys at once. A landowner could collect from many farms. A lender could provide money to many borrowers. Wealth began to separate from physical effort. That separation became one of history's most important economic changes. In the ancient world, lending also became a major source of wealth. Farmers borrowed seed, traders borrowed money for voyages, governments borrowed for war. The lender accepted risk in exchange for interest. If the borrower succeeded, the loan returned larger than before. Money appeared to produce more money. But interest had a darker side. A failed harvest could trap a family in debt. A failed voyage could destroy a merchant. Borrowers could lose land, freedom, or political power. So societies repeatedly struggled with the same question: when does lending create opportunity, and when does it become exploitation? That question has never disappeared. For centuries, land remained the main foundation of wealth. In many societies, the richest people were those who owned the most territory and controlled the labor performed on it. Land produced food, rent, taxes, and political influence. It could be inherited across generations. It could also be protected by law and military power. This made wealth extremely difficult to challenge. A laborer might work harder than a landowner, but the landowner owned the system that produced the income. The worker received payment once. The owner received a share repeatedly. That is the difference between income and ownership. Income is what you are paid for doing something. Ownership is what pays you because you possess something. The two can overlap, but they are not the same. This distinction explains much of the history of becoming rich. During the Middle Ages, merchants, guilds, and money changers expanded across growing towns. Trade fairs connected distant regions. Written contracts became more common. Credit allowed people to buy now and pay after goods were sold. Then banking families developed more sophisticated ways to move and multiply wealth. Instead of transporting heavy coins across dangerous roads, merchants could use bills of exchange. A document issued in one city could be paid in another. Banking networks reduced risk and made international trade faster. Accurate bookkeeping became essential. Merchants needed to know what they owned, what they owed, who owed them, and whether they were actually making a profit. Double-entry bookkeeping gave business owners a clearer picture of their financial world. Every transaction affected at least two sides of the record. Money entered one place and left another. Assets, debts, costs, and profits could be tracked more systematically. This sounds ordinary today. At the time, it was revolutionary. A business could now grow beyond the owner's memory. Partners in different cities could coordinate. Investors could judge performance. Wealth became easier to manage at scale. But the richest merchants still faced a major problem. A single voyage, mine, or workshop could require more money than one person possessed. The solution was shared ownership. Investors began pooling money to finance large ventures. If the project succeeded, they shared the profit. If it failed, no single person carried the entire loss. Eventually, joint stock companies allowed ownership to be divided into shares. This changed wealth forever. A person no longer needed to own the entire ship, mine, or company. He could own a fraction of it. That fraction could earn profit and sometimes be sold to someone else. Ownership became divisible, transferable, and scalable. The modern investment world began to take shape. At the same time, governments discovered that they could borrow from citizens and financiers. Instead of relying only on taxes or treasure already collected, states could issue promises to repay in the future. Public debt financed wars, fleets, roads, and expansion. Those who lent to governments could receive regular interest. A new class of wealthy investors emerged, not only people who owned land or goods, but people who owned claims on future payments. Wealth was becoming increasingly abstract. It could be a farm, a warehouse, or a ship, but it could also be a contract, a bond, a share, or an entry in a ledger. Then the Industrial Revolution accelerated everything. Machines allowed one factory to produce what once required hundreds of individual craftsmen. Steam power moved goods faster. Railways connected markets. Mass production lowered costs and expanded demand. But factories required large amounts of capital. Buildings had to be constructed. Machines had to be purchased. Workers had to be hired before products were sold. Raw materials had to be secured. The people who could gather capital gained an enormous advantage. Industrialists did not become rich because they personally made every product. They became rich because they owned systems that produced thousands or millions of products. A machine could work longer than a human. A factory could employ hundreds of people. A railway could earn from every passenger and shipment that used it. Scale became the new engine of wealth. The question was no longer only how hard can one person work? It became how large a system can one person own? This created spectacular fortunes in brutal working conditions. Industrial wealth often depended on low wages, long hours, dangerous factories, colonial resources, and weak protections for workers. The history of getting rich is not only a story of intelligence and innovation, it is also a story of power. Many fortunes were built because some people had access to land, credit, education, political connections, or protected markets that others did not. Some people took genuine risks and created valuable products. Others inherited assets, benefited from monopolies, or used political influence to block competition. Most real fortunes contain several forces at once: skill, timing, ownership, opportunity, risk, and luck. As economies grew, ordinary households slowly gained new ways to participate. Savings banks allowed people to protect money. Insurance reduced certain risks. Pensions helped workers prepare for old age. Stock markets allowed wider groups to buy shares. Mortgages made homeownership possible for families who could not pay the full price immediately. The 20th century brought rising wages in many countries, mass education, and consumer credit. Millions of people could now buy homes, cars, and appliances. But owning consumer goods was not the same as building wealth. A car might improve life, but it usually lost value over time. A television provided entertainment, but produced no income. Credit made products accessible, yet monthly payments could consume future earnings. This created one of the most important traps in personal finance. Looking wealthy and being wealthy are not the same thing. A person may display expensive objects while owning very little. Another may live modestly while quietly owning investments, property, or a profitable business. Wealth is not what you spend, it is what you keep and what continues to work for you. The rise of modern investing made this principle more powerful. When someone buys a productive asset, they purchase a claim on future value. A share may represent ownership in a company. A rental property may produce income. A bond may provide interest. A business may generate profit. Intellectual property may earn royalties. The asset may increase in price, produce cash, or do both. If the returns are reinvested, growth can compound. Compounding is simple, but its effects are extraordinary. Suppose an investment earns a return. The next return is earned not only on the original amount, but also on the previous gains. Over long periods, growth begins to accelerate. At first, the progress seems slow. Later, the gains can become larger than the contributions. This is why time matters so much. A young person with a modest amount and many years may eventually outperform someone who starts with more money but waits too long. Yet this does not mean everyone has equal access. Many people struggle to cover rent, food, healthcare, or family obligations. They cannot invest money they do not have. The mathematics of wealth may be universal. The opportunity to use it is not. Inheritance is another major force. Wealth can purchase education, housing, safety, time, and connections. A child from a wealthy family may begin adulthood without debt, receive help buying a home, take business risks, and inherit investments. A child from a poor family may begin with financial responsibilities, limited options, and no safety net. This does not determine every life, but it changes the starting line. One generation's assets can become the next generation's advantage. One generation's debts can become the next generation's burden. This is why wealth tends to concentrate unless forces push in the opposite direction. Taxes, public education, competition laws, worker protections, and social programs can widen opportunity. Monopolies, corruption, discrimination, and unequal access to credit can narrow it. Technology created another wave of fortunes. Software could be copied at almost no cost. A digital platform could serve millions of people. Networks became more valuable as more users joined. A small team could create a product that reached the entire world. The owners of successful technology companies could become extraordinarily wealthy because their products scaled faster than factories of the past. But the principle remained familiar. They own the system. Employees might earn salaries. Founders and investors own shares. If the company's value rose, ownership captured the largest gains. Today, wealth is built through many paths: business ownership, investment, property, specialized skills, intellectual property, inheritance, and sometimes speculation. But the basic structure has changed less than it appears. Throughout history, great wealth has usually come from at least one of four things: control of a scarce resource, ownership of a productive system, a network that connects buyers and sellers, or a claim on future income. Landlords own access to space. Businesses own productive organizations. Platforms own networks. Investors own claims. Salaries can create comfort and provide the money needed to begin. But very large fortunes usually come from ownership, not wages alone. That does not mean quitting a job or taking reckless risks. It means understanding the role of income. Income pays for life. A portion of income can also be converted into assets. Those assets may later produce additional income. If the process continues long enough, financial dependence on labor can slowly decline. The journey is usually less dramatic than social media suggests. Most lasting wealth is not created by a secret trick. It comes from increasing earning ability, controlling expenses, avoiding destructive debt, buying productive assets, reinvesting returns, managing risk, and allowing time to work. It also requires surviving mistakes. A single risky bet can create a fortune, but it can also destroy one. The stories of winners are visible. The failures disappear. This is called survivorship bias. For every famous entrepreneur who risked everything and succeeded, many others took similar risks and lost. For every investor who chose the perfect asset, countless people bought the wrong one at the wrong time. Wealth building is not only about maximizing returns, it is about avoiding ruin. A person who remains in the game can recover from ordinary losses. A person who loses everything may never get another chance. Diversification, emergency savings, insurance, and manageable debt may look boring, but boring strategies survive. There is also a moral question. How much wealth is enough? At what point does ownership become power over other people's lives? When does profit reward useful innovation? And when does it come from exploitation, monopoly, or political influence? History does not offer one simple answer. Wealth has financed medicine, education, art, exploration, and technology. It has also financed conquest, corruption, and environmental destruction. Money amplifies intention. It gives people more choices, more protection, and more influence. But it does not automatically create wisdom, happiness, or purpose. So what does the entire history of getting rich actually teach us? First, wealth began with surplus. Second, surplus became powerful when it was stored, traded, and invested. Third, ownership separated earning from personal labor. Fourth, scale allowed systems to produce far more than individuals. Fifth, time and compounding allowed small advantages to grow. And finally, wealth has never been created in a vacuum. It depends on laws, institutions, infrastructure, workers, customers, and social stability. No fortune is entirely individual. The richest people in history did not become rich simply because they worked harder than everyone else. They owned land, trade routes, banks, factories, companies, networks, or intellectual property. They gained access to systems that multiplied effort. For an ordinary person, the lesson is not to imitate a billionaire's lifestyle. It is to understand the machinery. Earn more when possible. Spend less than you earn. Avoid debt that consumes your future without producing value. Build a safety margin. Acquire productive assets gradually. Reinvest. Keep learning. Do not confuse luck with genius. And give time the opportunity to compound your decisions. Because becoming rich has never truly been about possessing the most coins. It has been about owning something that continues to create value after the work that built it is finished. That was true of the first field that produced a surplus. It was true of the first merchant ship. It was true of the first factory, the first share certificate, and the first digital platform. And it is still true today. The tools have changed. The principle has not. Wealth grows when ownership, time, and productive value work together.